Factoring tricky trinomials, and for the purposes of this video, I'm calling a tricky trinomial a trinomial, so three terms where a does not equal 1. So there are essentially two methods that I'm going to show on this video. There's actually lots of different methods to factor tricky trinomials. Remember that the first thing that you should always check for with a tricky trinomial or something that doesn't have 1 as the a value is a common factor. That's always the first thing that you should look for. And if there is a common factor, of course, you should do that first. And then you might actually end up with a simple trinomial. These ones, for the first few that I'm going to show, do not have a common factor and do not have an a value that equals 1. So I'm going to highlight the AC chart method and decomposition. First of all, we're going to do these three examples using the AC chart, and we're going to factor it completely, or as make it as simple as we possibly can. So in order to do the AC method, what we want to do is we want to think of all the ways of getting the a value. So that would be the 3 in our first example. So that would be this number right here. So over to the side here, we're going to write what we call a little AC chart. And all the ways of getting 3 when we multiply is 1 times 3. And there's really no other options for the a value. It's 1 times 3. Technically, you could do 3 times 1 as well, but we're just going to write the 1 version for the a value. And for the c value, we're going to think of all the ways of getting 4 by multiplying. So that would be that one right there is our c value. It's 1 times 4. But we are also going to do the flip of that and consider 4 times 1. And then the other option would be 2 times 2. So those are the base numbers that we're going to work with. Now, using kind of a crisscross method, we are going to think of all the ways we could get a if we're adding those numbers together. Now, we've got to think about that whole multiplying and adding thing like we did with basic trinomials or simple trinomials. So to get a 4 at the end, or to get a positive 4, we would need 2 positive numbers or 2 negative numbers. But to get a positive 8 in the middle there, we're going to need them to be both positive. So just going to keep that in mind. And then what we're going to do here is we're going to crisscross and try to find 2 things that add to 8. So here we go. For example, 3 times 1 is 3, and 1 times 4 is 4. So 3 and 4 do not add up to 8, so that's not going to work. That one's not going to work at all. Then we start again. And we're going to do 3 times 4, which is 12, and 1 times 1. So we've got 12 and 1, which is 13. That's certainly not going to work. Then we start again, and we try the last one. So 3 times 2 is 6. 1 times 2 is 2, and if we added those together, we would get 8. So that one would actually work for this one. So we're going to now write our equation in order. So I'm going to circle these two. Those are the 2 that we want. And we're going to write them across, not using the crisscross. So here we go. We're going to write x, or 1x. That's where I get that 1. And the 2 plus 2. And then 3x, which would be this number. So 3x. And again, we have plus 2 there. So that's how we end up writing the binomials. Now you can check it. You can expand and simplify those 2 binomials and see if you end up with the original question. But that is the factored form. So let's try that again with our second example. So our second example, we're going to draw our AC chart again. We're going to write all the ways of getting 6. So 1 times 6. And remember, we're not going to do the flip for that one, so just 2 times 3. All the ways of getting c is just 1 times 1. We would do the flip if we could for that one, but we can't, so 1 times 1. And then we're going to do our little crisscrossy thing, And remember, we're looking for two numbers that multiply to a positive 1. So we're looking for a positive. So two positives or two negatives, but it has to add to negative 5. So that means we're going to look for two negative numbers. So here we go. We're going to do our crisscross thing. 6 times 1 is 6. 1 times 1 is 1. Now, that looks like you could do 5. It could work with 5 if you had a positive and a negative. But remember, we need them both to be negative. So that is not going to work. That would end up being negative 7. So let's try the other option now. We would do 2 times 1, which is 2, and 3 times 1, which is 3. And 2 plus 3 would work. That would be 5. Remember, they both have to be negative, so it's really 2 plus negative 3. So they both have to be negative. That seems to be our answers there. And remember, both of them are going to be negative. And then we're going to write it straight across. So we're going to go like this. And we're going to use the 2 and those two in that order. So we rewrite it like this. 2x minus 1 and 3x minus 1. And it doesn't always have to be, I noticed the last example had the 2 and the 2 and the 1 and the 1. It doesn't always work out like that. So let's try another example. You try this one and then pause it and then reveal the answer. When you're ready, you can push play. So here I've written some of the things that you should have. You're writing down all the ways of getting A by multiplying, which would be 1 and 2. And then C would be 1 and 9, 9 and 1, 3 and 3. You're going to remember that you're looking for a negative C value, so you need a positive and a negative number when we're doing our crisscrossing. And then I did each of the crisscrossing in a different color. So if you look at the green one, 2 times 1 is 2, 1 times 9 is 9, and below I put the 2 and the 9. If one was positive and one was negative, we would not end up with 3. Doesn't matter which way we do that. Then I did the red one, 2 times 9, 1 times 1, which would be 18 and 1. You could see in the red, if one was positive, one was negative, that would not work either. And then 2 times 3 is 6, 1 times 3 is 3. 6 and 3 would work if one was positive and one was negative. So then the key is just trying to get which one do I need. So I need to add them together to get a positive 3. So that means the negative is going to have to be with the negative 3, and the positive is going to have to be the positive 6. Going back to our AC chart, 2 times that would give me my positive 6, and this would be my negative 3. That's important to put in there, because then when I write my stuff in order, going straight across in order, this way and this way, I'm going to use those positive and negatives in the right spot. So I end up getting, and notice it's an M this time, M plus 3 and 2M minus 3. And again, you could multiply that through and give it a try. So this is one method called the AC method. Again, there are tons of different methods. We're just highlighting 2 on this video. The next page has the exact same examples, but we're going to use a different method. This method is called decomposition. And again, we're using the exact same examples just to show you how to do it in a different way. So what we're going to do with these is we're going to first of all recognize we don't have a common factor. And then what we're going to do is try to split this up into a 4-term question where we would do factor by grouping. And we're going to split that middle term that I pointed at. So what we're trying to do is figure out, similar to basic trinomials, but we're going to figure out 2 numbers that multiply to give me whatever A times C is. So in this case, multiply to give me 3 times 4, which would be 12. And add to give me that middle term, which in this case is 8, positive 8. They're both positive in this question. So we're going to go through all the ways of getting 12. So 1 times 12, 2 times 6, 3 times 4. And then we're looking for a combination with everything being positive that would add to 8, and that would be the answer there. So what we're going to do is rewrite this question as a 4-term question. We're not really doing any math here. We're just simply rewriting that middle term into 2 terms so that we can do our factor by grouping. Now we're going to go back to our factor by grouping process where we're grouping it into 2 groups, and we're going to find the common factors of each of those groups. So in the first group, the 3x squared plus 2x, we just have x that is common, and we would have 3x plus 2. And then in the second group, we have a 2 that is common. Now don't forget to put the plus in there. That's really important. We're separating those 2 elements there. And then we're going to say 3x plus 2 in there. And this is when you know you're on the right track, because now we have a common factor of 3x plus 2 that we can put at the front. And then the other 2 will make up the other bracket. And that's all there is to that. So it's just a different method to use for factoring tricky trinomials. Take a minute now, see if you can use that process to do the other 2, and then I will reveal the answers. So here we have 6x squared minus 5x plus 1, and I've looked at all the different ways of getting 6 times 1, which is the 6. So we're looking for 2 numbers that multiply to 6 and add to that negative 5. So over here I've written those different options, 1 times 6 and 2 times 3. Remember, to get a positive when I multiply, right there, I need 2 positives or I need 2 negatives. But in order to get the middle term when I add, I know I'm going to be looking for 2 negatives. So then my 1 times 6 isn't going to work because I have to have both of them being negative. That would be negative 6. So the 2 and the 3 are going to be my answer. So all I do then is I use those numbers to rewrite that middle term as negative 2x and negative 3x. And then I simply do the factor by grouping process. Try that last one. And here's the answer for the last one. You're trying to find 2 numbers that multiply to give you 2 times 9, which is negative 18, and add to give you positive 3. So remember that you're going to need a positive and a negative number in some combination. All the ways of getting 18, 1 times 18, 2 times 9, 3 times 6, and we need the combination that would, if I used a positive and a negative, add up to positive 3. So that's going to be this 3 times 6. And you can see I then used that in that line to separate that middle term into negative 3m plus 6. Remember, when you add them together, they have to add to that positive 3. And then we're just simply doing factor by grouping. So we're looking at those 2 and those 2 separately and doing my factor by grouping, and we get 2m minus 3 bracket m minus 2. Sometimes I have people ask, does it matter what order we put those 2 terms? Could we put 6m first and then 3? Yes, you totally could. It would work out just fine. You would just have different factors that you pull out, but at the end you would still get those 2 brackets. You might get them written in a different order. You might end up like something like that. So you have that one first and then 2m minus 3, but you are going to get the same factors. Now, taking it just a little bit further, sometimes you get factor if possible. I'm just going to keep going with decomposition, but you could do this with the AC chart as well. You're just trying to see if you can find, first of all, common factor, which there isn't one there, and then you're going to see if you can find 2 numbers that multiply to 12 and add to 2. So 1 times 12, 2 times 6, 3 times 4. Now you're looking for ones that add up, and these all have to be positive, add up to 2, and you can see none of them work. So this is not possible. And you would find that when you did your crisscrossing with your AC chart, there would be nothing that would add up to those that middle term. So therefore, it's not possible. You will sometimes hit questions when you are doing work that look like tricky trinomials that don't have a common factor that will end up not being possible to factor. Another type of question would have a common factor that you can do. So take a minute and try this now. My hint is pull out the common factor first and then hit play to see the answer. Here is the full solution. I just highlighted the two numbers that I did use. So remember, first of all, you're going to pull out that common factor of 2 right there. And then you have a tricky trinomial still inside the bracket with no more common factors. So you're going to use the AC chart or decomposition. This time I chose the AC chart. You're going to put down all your different combinations, do your cross-checking. You'll find that 8 times 2 is 16, and 1 times 3 is 3. And remember, we're after a positive, or a negative, sorry, C value and a positive B value. So we're going to need a positive and a negative to get that negative C value. So one of these has to be positive and one has to be negative. It's going to have to be that in order to get that positive 13 in that B value spot. So you go back up to your chart and determine that the 2 has to be the positive and the 3 has to be the negative. Then I use the yellow highlighter to show which way you write that. So you're going to leave your 2 in the front, then the x plus 2, because you're going to use these two. You're going to use the 1 and the 8 and the 2 and the 3. So you're going to do 1x plus 2 and 8x minus 3. And then you are completely done. The last type is just ones here that have the 2 variables, and pretty much you just do the exact same thing, but just add a variable on the end. So take a minute and try it, and then you can push play to reveal the answer. And here is your full solution. So we do not have a common factor. We're just going to work with the AC chart. We're going to ignore the letters for now and just go and do our crisscrossing and checking. You will see that I highlighted here that the one that works when you crisscross is those two. And then when you determine we are positive and negatives, you need to remember that your C value has to be negative and your middle value has to be negative. So to get a middle, or to get a negative C value, you're going to need to multiply a positive and negative number. So then the question becomes which one is positive and which one is negative. And in order to get that negative 3 when we're adding, the negative 8 would have to be the negative 1 and the 5 would have to be the positive. So we go up in the AC chart and determine that the 1 has to be positive and the 4 has to be negative. And then you simply write your answer straight across using those 2 variables, and in your actual answer here, you just add those y values at the end because of that y squared. And it works pretty simply. So that covers a lot of the different types of tricky trinomials that you will see. Remember, it is always a good idea when you have one of these to double check inside the brackets once you do factor it and make sure there is no more common factors or difference of squares or something else that you can do within the brackets. You always want to make sure that you factor completely.